Hey folks, welcome into another episode of A Nichols Worth. I'm your host, Keaton Nichols. Make sure you follow me on the socials everywhere at Keaton D. Nichols. That's at Keaton D. Nichols. Shout out to the folks they're going to be hopping on Instagram and the Twitter. That's where you can follow me at Keaton D. Nichols. If you'd like to follow the show, it's real simple. It's A Nichols Worth at A Nichols Worth. If you're watching on the Facebook or the Twitter already, you see it in the bottom left. There you go. Bottom left corner. So make sure you give us a follow. Spotify, Anchor, Facebook, anywhere that you listen to your podcast. Hook us up. A Nichols Worth 3 times a week. Happy Monday out there to everyone. Hope everyone had a great weekend as usual. Now, this past weekend, of course, we did get a lot of news on the police reform front. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And some interesting news from the Justice Department. So we'll get to that in just a second. First, if you're listening live, make sure you share this on your timeline. Somebody else may be interested in the information that we're talking about this week, or even on tonight's show specifically. So extra points for those that, of course, share the show on their page. So let me know what you think during the course of the conversation. So without further ado, let's get into the news of the day. City officials in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, are now bracing for social unrest ahead of the release of body camera footage that shows its officers shooting and killing 42-year-old Andrew Brown in his own driveway. Authorities promised to allow the family of Andrew Brown to see the body camera footage and the dash cam footage of the incident, but the family's attorney today said at a press conference that only 20 seconds of that footage was actually allowed to be shown to the family after the department cut it down. And then apparently there's a lot of other police officers there that were wearing body cameras. Not really sure at this time if they had those body cameras on and if that footage is also recoverable. But at this point, we do know that there was a large police presence and that a very limited portion of the body camera footage, just 20 seconds, was allowed to be showed to the family. Now, I'm not exactly sure what motivation the Elizabeth City, North Carolina police would have in limiting this footage to just 20 seconds. I think people are a little ahead of this by now and can understand that there's obviously more than 20 seconds to tell the story of what happened here, but the police are only showing the family this 20 seconds. Still, even those 20 seconds apparently didn't paint a very good picture. As a matter of fact, it painted a very dark and disturbing picture of what happened when police showed up outside of Andrew Brown's door. This is according to the family. Now, because the video has not been released to the public just yet as of 8:04 on Monday, April the 26th. Little timestamp on the video. But anyway, the city is declaring a state of emergency ahead of this release. Protests and demonstrations have already started there in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, as it seems like the next city on a list of cities now that are sort of enraged and inflamed at the way that police officers have handled an interaction. That's the best way that I can put it. Obviously, this issue receiving a lot of attention right now. The declaration of a state of emergency before the footage is released does not bode well, right? Like whatever the public is going to see, even if it's just this 20 seconds, is going to be bad. It is not going to show these police officers in a very positive light. Even today, the very release of this footage to the family today that was supposed to happen earlier in the day, sometime around 11:30, that was pushed back and delayed, so the family couldn't see that footage until much later in the day. And afterwards, they had a press conference. You can see the entirety of that press conference, and you can tell, obviously, that the family is deeply hurt and disturbed at seeing the killing of their loved one. This is the trauma often that we kind of skip over, or we kind of sensationalize in a way that, or we romanticize it rather, in such a way that's kind of disgusting. But anyway, you can see that family's pain and their hurt, in analyzing, or I'm sorry, not analyzing, but you can see their pain and their hurt in, sort of talking about the fact that their family member had been gunned down in his driveway. That doesn't, again, none of this bodes very well. I don't, obviously I don't look forward to seeing this footage. I don't I don't know what's going to happen when it releases, but authorities think it's going to be pretty bad. The family attorney, Chantel Cherry Lassiter, she said that the footage showed specifically deputies blocking Brown in his driveway while serving a warrant and approaching his car while firing. Brown did not move towards them or use a weapon, and deputies fired AR-223 semi-automatic rifles and Glock 17 pistols as he attempted to back away. Seems like a lot of firepower there. But again, we're going to get a lot more into exactly how wrong this exactly was coming down the line. We haven't seen any of the footage just yet, but the family is already saying, again, this is bad. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't putting anyone's life in danger. And apparently they shot him somewhere between 10 and 20 times, according to Attorney Lassiter. So again, I don't know necessarily what's going to come out of this, but I'm concerned. And I think, the reaction to this with the preemptive strike of Elizabeth City, North Carolina, they're saying we're going to declare a state of emergency already because we are anticipating that something really bad is going to happen, or that people are going to hit the streets and to be very emotionally upset at what they see. But this reaction isn't totally disconnected from some other political themes that we've talked about very recently on this show. For example, just a couple of shows ago, we talked about Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who I heard described over the weekend as oftentimes a lightning rod of Republican criticism. And I appreciated that term, a lightning rod of criticism, because she does draw a lot of criticism from the other side. She's an easy target because she doesn't often sort of edit herself or curb her comments the way that many high-ranking politicians do. But anyway, last week, Congressman Maxine Waters, just ahead of the Chauvin verdict last week, actually, which almost threw it for a loop in and of itself, she said, in effect, I'm not going to read everything and read back everything verbatim what she said, but she said, in effect, we need to stay in the streets when this kind of thing happens. When these injustices are becoming so obvious in our world, these are things that we need to stay in the streets, as she said. We need to stay in the streets and let these people know that we mean business effectively. I mean, those were powerful words that didn't threaten anything except for an oppressive regime nestling itself in with an alleged democracy, so to speak. That's all that was, but it inflamed the other side a lot because they got scared at what could possibly happen. Stay in the streets and let them know we mean business. Oh, no. And a lot of people made this about looting and the idea that protesters in the street could turn or potentially morph into dangerous protesters, rioters, looters, things like that, right? That's kind of what the argument was sort of housed in. We can't allow Maxine Waters to say these kinds of things because those people that protest, right? Not the people that protested at the Capitol on January 6th, not the people that protested, Governor Whitmer in Michigan's coronavirus restrictions. No, we're not talking about those kind of protesters, right? We're talking about the kind of protesters that would show up after police shoot some black guy or some black woman or anything else like that. We're not saying black people, right? But we're just saying the protesters that would show up after that kind of thing, that would listen to what Maxine Waters is saying here and saying that we need to stay in the streets and that let these people know we mean business. That's what the Republican angst was against. The idea that this group of people, these specific people, could be the ones that legally use their voice, if you will, in a different kind of way, but legally use their voice to challenge and protest a lot of what we have going on right now with police. And this happens again and again and again. I'm not going to get into it tonight. We've had other shows where we talk about the discrepancies and why it's a big deal that we talk about issues and stories like this of Andrew Brown being gunned down in his own driveway. Okay, there are plenty of good reasons, but either way, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, when she said this, it scared a lot of Republicans. The threat of peaceful protest is a part of civic engagement. It puts pressure on elected leaders to change the way that they're doing business or face the scrutiny that comes with the protesters that are usually outside their doors, marching through their streets, that kind of thing. And I, for one, have been critical of protests. I still am, really. Mainly because the effective it used to be a more effective tactic, I'd say, to bring about change, because shame was such a thing. Right? Like this idea that I'm not going to allow these people to drag my name through the mud, or I'm not going to allow there to be a one-sided argument about what the narrative is about this situation. I need to defend myself or fight back. There was some sort of action step that seemingly was involved in sort of affecting that change. Nowadays, folks don't have shame anymore. I mean, we saw that in great detail over the last 4 years, that there were plenty of people that were willing to adopt what might be generally described as embarrassing political stances, shameful political stances. They were okay and comfortable, not just regular people, but elected officials were as well, of supporting, elected officials like Donald Trump and others as well. That clearly were doing things in a very anti-American way. It was embarrassing. But for those people, they put their shame behind them or beside them and decided to rock with their guy anyway, or rock with their candidate anyway. During the last 4 years, if there was anything that my eyes were opened up to, it was the idea that in order to protect certain political values, if you will, people will look like absolute fools, like straight up idiots. Right? Not political stances, not like I lean left or I lean right. Like, people are willing to look like total fools, all to feel like they are individually right, that their individual opinion is right. It's created and crafted this really ugly political environment in this country, not just over the last 4 years. Again, we've talked about it before. It didn't just happen over the last 4 years, but it certainly seemingly came to a head in the last 4 years. So nowadays, I believe in a more forceful and coordinated approach to sort of bringing about this change that we need. I don't think that protests should go away. I think it's more like a protest and type of issue, because the protests alone aren't the only things getting it done. And the reason why I say it's protest and is because there is a psychological effect that these protests are having, not just, as I mentioned this a few shows ago, it's having an economic impact on the way that companies and corporations are doing business here in this country as well. This is a very economically driven sort of country when you can almost sort of follow the shifts and trends of what happens with the people in this country according to how the how finances are regulated in this country, or unregulated, I guess, if you want to, talk Reagan and all that other stuff, right? Like you can follow the ebb and flow of the country by following the money. And so when you have corporations and big money, players essentially in the game that are beginning to shift their culture on this, it starts to bring about a different feel for how the protests work. Protests alone won't do it, right? But if you have protests and you have now major corporations and companies willing to, let's say, withdraw their money like they did in the MLB All-Star game that was supposed to be in Atlanta, it's now going to be in Colorado, right? Like, that was a way of flexing your financial muscles. Pepsi and all these companies, this was a way of them saying, I'm going to influence this conversation the only way that I as a company or as a corporation know how, which is through dollars and cents. So it's a both and type of situation. I think this is the kind of direction that we are headed in. The police are under investigation. I said that after the Derek Chauvin trial, or before rather. The Chauvin verdict was that on top of Chauvin being on trial here, he's kind of a symbol for the rest of the reform that is needed throughout the rest of the country. That policing itself was going to be on trial during the course of Derek Chauvin's trial. And that's exactly what seems to be happening. It's still too early to have, a grotesque amount of optimism about what we are seeing right now. And to say that this investigation shows that we are unabashedly and undoubtedly heading in the right direction when it comes to reforming police, now that a more national approach, or more federal rather approach, is coming to this, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I'm careful, I'm cautious, because I've seen these things before. I've seen these patterns before, and I've talked about how, the United States, we are so good at finding out exactly what the problem is without actually lifting a finger to solve said problem. We are good at studies and research. We're very good at these things, conducting investigations. However, when it comes to the action steps, we're not very good, because those action steps are not require us not to just be critical of the cultures that have been created in this country. It requires us to change them. And as I said, change can be quite uncomfortable for many people, especially who have benefited from that culture. We are not trying to convince a majority of the people that what needs to be done here. We are convincing, or we are not convincing, rather, or we are not trying to convince, rather, the majority of the country. Rather, the majority of the country is on the other side. You know, we don't have allies in this fight the way that we do with other things. But it's a long fight, and I do think that the pendulum has officially swung in this. So let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments on Instagram or on Facebook. I'm going to get into my second story, which kind of connects into the first story that we talked about here. On the... Okay, I'm not sure if we got some comments. I thought I had some comments. Oh, I do have some comments here on the Facebook. Tavon T keeps it fit. Parker, make sure you check out parkourtherapy.com. He says, I'm proud to be black, but my DNA is exhausted. And I thought kind of the same thing looking at this story today. You know, it's so heavy, like reading these stories every single week is heavy. And I always think about when the national media attention seemingly goes away from these high profile shootings. I bring this up all the time. It doesn't mean that the shootings stop. And that's the really heavy part for me, that if the media, and I don't want to demonize the media by saying that, if media coverage of these events and of these happenings was consistent every single time, not just when it becomes popular to talk about it, but whenever it happens, every single time that it happens, I think that this would sort of start to wear out the rest of the country as well. And that is not a sign to say that we should stop talking about this. I think whenever I say that it would wear out the rest of the country, I think that's a sign that clearly we need to reform what is going on. Not the individual police officers, but the idea of policing in its entirety. Because here's what's going to happen, right? It's going to be Elizabeth City, this week. And then it's going to be, Santa Fe, New Mexico next week. And then it's going to be Boulder, Colorado the week after that. And then it's going to be Sacramento, California the week after that. And then it's going to be Fort Worth, Texas. And we're going to keep going around and bouncing around in these different states and these different cities and these different departments, with different police chiefs and a different era of responsibility for each and every single one. And we're going to be chasing after these things very quickly. You're going to lose your mind. Like when I think back to, even 2014 and 2015, that was, 6-7 years ago at this point. It's overwhelming to look at the list of police, African Americans killed by police just in that year. From Beaver Creek, Ohio, with John Crawford, talked about him in a little bit in the last episode, to Ezell Ford, who had mental health issues in Los Angeles, who was shot in the back as officers were kneeling on him. I mean, there are a ton of these stories that, I hate to say it, kind of get lost in the fray. And the reason why they get lost in the fray is because we're trying to chase each individual case and treat it as though these things aren't connected. The George Floyd case, I think that the whole situation surrounding George Floyd and his murder, that has changed that narrative a little bit, somewhat. And again, I don't want to get too early on this, but it seems as though it's changed the narrative of, instead of saying let's chase down each individual case, let's chase down the core of the issue, which is policing. And I have confidence that that will continue. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you're watching us live, let me know if you have any comments or if you have any questions, anything else like that. I'll do my best to add it to the program here. Change is most certainly needed. Now, we are under a different presidential regime than we were in the past 4 years, in case anyone noticed. I certainly did. Joseph R. Biden, I think it's R. Joseph R. Biden is now president. He is a Democrat. He used to rock with the Barack gang, Barack Rock. And I think a lot of the policies that were going on at the end, the last couple of years of the Obama administration, didn't really have a chance to survive. And now we're starting to see some of those efforts reanimate themselves, in an effort to sort of curb policing from a nationwide perspective. A conversation that got a lot of attention, but not really a lot of traction. So the news that's coming out of thehill.com, Attorney General Merrick Garland, that's a fun name, by the way, announced Monday that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, would launch an investigation into the Louisville Metro Police Department. The second such probe announced in the past week. We say second because the first one, of course, is happening in the Minneapolis Police Department, where we just discussed, the unfortunate end of George Floyd's, life at the hands of police officer Derek Chauvin. Anyway, the reason why I say Merrick Garland is interesting, too, for you political nerds out there, he was the individual who was to be nominated by President Barack Obama about 8.5 or so months before the 2020 election. Basically, Republicans got real petty and said, we're not going to allow Barack Obama to select another Supreme Court justice in his last 8 months. Fast forward a few years when that exact situation happened, except for with maybe like 3.5 to 4 months before the election just last year, the Republicans reversed course and allowed their president to pick a conservative judge to be approved for the Supreme Court. It was a whole big thing. Merrick Garland got caught in the middle, and you could say at the end of the day, even though Merrick Garland didn't really do anything wrong, he kind of got the short end, definitely got the short end of the stick. Anyway, long story short, that guy that got shafted away from a SCOTUS position back in 2016 is now leading the Department of Justice. One of the cooler appointments, I'd say, by Joseph R. Biden, President of the United States. Anyway, to move on, they're launching this investigation into the Louisville Metro Police Department, and as you know, despite the fact that today's announcement, or this week's announcement, didn't mention Breonna Taylor specifically by name, we know that Breonna Taylor was the young woman shot to death by Louisville police executing a no-knock warrant in her apartment. By the way, since then, City Council has kind of kiboshed the no-knock warrant thing. But anyway, they're executing a no-knock warrant for a drug raid when her boyfriend, who they were both sleeping at the time, her boyfriend fired a warning shot back at the door before officers opened fire, killing Breonna Taylor. One of those officers has been fired. One of those officers has been fired, but none of the officers have been charged with crimes. None. 0.00% have been charged with crimes. That's kind of a disturbing thing. This happened last year, and it's always interesting when an investigation into these kind of things sort of goes out. I can remember that this was an investigation in which not internal affairs, but after an investigation of thine self, Louisville police said, "Look, we did the right thing here, right?" We announced ourselves, which is a big debate whether or not they did that or not, but we announced ourselves, and then we heard shooting, and so we shot, and it's all this defense, right, of what happened. This was the situation with Breonna Taylor was one of the most obvious and egregious forms of police misconduct that I've ever seen, right? And again, it's not about what the incident or it's not about the results of what actually happened, because what actually happened is important still. Obviously, it resulted in a young woman's death, but it's less about this specific incident and the role of policing. Why the hell were Louisville police officers executing a no-knock warrant at night in an apartment, in the wrong apartment, by the way, with seemingly such little information, right? There were so many things about the situation, even before officers fired the shots that killed Breonna Taylor, even before that happened. There were so many things that seemingly went wrong in that process that it makes my head explode, right? But there was a focus on the end, right? Well, is what our Louisville police officers, is what they did justifiable under the law? Here goes that word justifiable again. And the investigation, basically came up with, yes, the police officers did what they were supposed to do. The police officers behaved as normal, reasonable police officers should in that moment. Now, what happened ended up being tragic. The setup was absolutely horrendous. The whole idea of doing this as police and police rather having the right to do this kind of thing is ridiculous. So ridiculous that City Council banned the action almost immediately after. Yet none of the officers have been charged with crimes. I talked about this a lot, especially with the case with in Columbus, Ohio, 15-year-old Nikita Wright. I believe Nikita Wright. It's the so many people are talking about, well, she had a knife and there was chaos going on and there was a chaotic situation. It's the idea of policing. When a police shows up, or when a police officer shows up to that situation, what is the reasonable thing that a police officer is expected to do? And I think, we've already heard from some experts in that situation and in this situation as well, that police officers did what a police officer is supposed to do. So if we look at these deaths as unjust, which I personally do, I don't know how you view it, but I look at these deaths as unjust. If I say that there has been a legally sanctioned police department that's allowed to do these things and that won't face any scrutiny for it, but we acknowledge that what they did was wrong, then there's only one thing that needs changing here, and that's the policing itself. Period. Anyway, let me get back on track here. The investigation, the federal investigation into the Louisville Police Department. So this is now bigger than just a state investigation. The federal investigation into the Louisville Police Department will tee up federal oversight of local police departments, giving the Department of Justice an avenue to bring civil suits. Civil suits just means money, against police departments with a pattern of using excessive force or discriminatory practices against certain groups of people, such as people of color or people with disabilities. And it's immediately, as soon as I read that last line, I'm like, wait. I have heard and I have seen this one before. Where have I seen this before? Federal investigation headed out by the Department of Justice into a police department after allegedly an excessive use of force charged by the community. Where have I heard this? And it's the exact same thing, give or take a few details here and there, that happened with the Cleveland Police Department following the shooting of 12-year-old Tamir Rice, who you all might remember was playing with a toy gun in a park. Someone called the cops on him. The police showed up in less than 2 seconds, came out of the car and blew Tamir Rice away, 12 years old. Now, none of the officers in that incident were charged with anything. Let's not forget that. This was back in 2013. Holy smokes. 8 years ago. 2013, this happened. Under President Barack Obama, by the way. That is somewhat important here. I'm not blaming him for it, but that is somewhat important here to understand that this is not just because you have a different president, things are going to change. Conscious effort to make that change. Now, under that Obama administration, the Cleveland Police Department, the Department of Justice decided to launch an investigation into the Cleveland Police Department. That investigation, this is according to the DOJ website. I'm pulling this directly off of there. You all can check this out if you want to. The investigation launched in March of 2013, assessed the use of force practices of the Cleveland Division of Police following a high number of high-profile use of force incidents. Now, of course, we're mainly talking about Tamir Rice there in that particular case. But anyway, it goes on. The investigation concluded, I'll skip past all the boring stuff for you. The investigation concluded that there is reasonable cause to believe that Cleveland police officers engage in a pattern or practice of unreasonable and in some cases unnecessary force in violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. That pattern or practice includes, and one of the first things listed here, the unnecessary and excessive use of deadly force, the unnecessary, excessive, or retaliatory use of lethal force, including tasers, chemical sprays, and fists. And here it goes, the excessive force against persons who are mentally ill or in crisis. Hello. Including cases where officers in Cleveland, this is something specific to Cleveland, including cases where officers were called exclusively for a welfare check. A welfare check, and imagine an officer exhibiting excessive force for a responded call about a welfare check. Anyway, these were the kind of ridiculous things that were going on in the Cleveland Police Department before 2013 arrived, and the Department of Justice investigation, which lasted a year and a half, didn't wrap up until December of 2014, right? A year and a half, they found that this pattern and practice was ripe in the Cleveland Police Department. All these things, unnecessary use of deadly force, employment of dangerous and poor and dangerous tactics that place officers in situations where avoidable force becomes inevitable. Like, there's a lot of good stuff in here. Under the Obama administration, in 2014, they wrapped up this investigation. The investigation concluded that Cleveland officers are not provided with adequate training, policy guidance, support, and supervision, and therefore federal oversight would be used in making sure that the Cleveland Police Department did a number of things, including adequately review and investigate officers' use of force, fully and objectively investigate all allegations of misconduct, amongst some other things as well. Other federal oversight implementations that were supposed to be a part of what we see going on in the Cleveland Police Department. Maybe that helped out in the Cleveland Police Department. Maybe. That was 2014. But obviously, we still have a major problem nationwide with police shooting people. This investigation report, this Department of Justice investigation back in 2014, initially when I heard about it, it gave me hope that maybe the federal government might be willing to step in. Barack Obama was president still at this time. And remember, I talked about it on the last show, that there were some times legislatively that I think Barack Obama did a great job with forwarding and pushing initiatives that were kind of stuck in the mud. But moments like this, where he could have used his bully pulpit, his top-ranking pulpit, to ensure that things like this were pushed further, he did not. Maybe aimed at kind of keeping friends on both sides of the aisle. Either way, the next presidential administration that came in was, of course, the Trump administration. And that killed any and all possibility that these investigations would ever continue. I think we all knew that. And so we have no idea what would have happened if the investigations like the one that went on in the Cleveland Police Department that didn't really yield any meaningful results. If these investigations would have had a chance to continue, we have no idea what the last 4 years of police misconduct would have looked like versus the last 4 years that we actually did get, in which these investigations were squashed. Essentially, Trump called off the dogs of the Department of Justice, and no further investigations took place over the last 4 years. Now we've got a Democratic administration back in there. Old Smoking Joe back in office. Like his boy Barack 7 years ago, he can continue these kinds of things. You do have to ask yourself, though, even with the disruption in this Department of Justice investigation, why haven't these investigations yielded better results? From the Kerner Commission report back in 1969, all the way up to modern studies that we have. Just a couple of weeks ago, the CDC saying they're going to launch an all-out effort to find where the racism is in medicine, in so many words. And it's crazy to think or to sort of figure out that we don't have it figured out by this point. We really don't. But after many investigations and things like that of the past that have kind of fallen flat, now we kind of have an opportunity to do something different. After the trial of Derek Chauvin, in which more than just Derek Chauvin was on trial, it was all of policing, now we can kind of look at this approach. Minneapolis and Cleveland are first up on this list. That doesn't just mean that police officers in Minneapolis and Cleveland are going to be the only ones held responsible for such actions. It's still likely, in my estimation, just my 2 cents or 5 cents, whatever, on this issue, is that it's still going to be local governments, state or even local municipalities, that are going to be primarily responsible for enacting this change. But if the big bad federal government is keeping a very close and watchful eye on what happens within these departments, and policies and procedures are put in place that would make it very, very difficult for these local police departments to operate smoothly without enacting change, then we could start to see some of those winds shifting when it comes to police reform. Again, these are just baby steps. These are small things that we need to continue to implement. We need, obviously, leadership, elected leadership that's going to be on board with this kind of thing. And the reason why that's important is because you got a lot of lukewarm players in the game right now. You have a lot of politicians that would like to do something to see the killings stopped, or they would like, rather, to see the killings stop, but they don't want to take action that could put them at risk politically in some way, shape, or form. And that sort of dichotomy of leadership is something that needs to be moved out. That can't be moved out unless it comes with our participation. Protests, yes, are a part of this. Just one part. Our civic engagement is another critical part of this. But the sort of ability to stay on situations like this, the ability to take advantage of the momentum of the moment right now, when lots of companies and corporations across the country are trying to be on the right side of history right now. This is the summer. This is the year that needs to be a critical first domino in crafting and creating real effective change in police reform. I don't know if Joe Biden's going to be the guy to do it. You know, he seems like a nice guy. He seems like he wouldn't, call you any mean names, not to your face at least. But does he have the sort of backbone? Is he willing to sacrifice certain political realities of his future in order to get this kind of thing done? Remember, I anticipate that Kamala Harris will be running on the Democratic ticket in 2024. It's just my hot take. And so if Kamala Harris is running in 2024 on behalf of the Democrats, or if she's overall the future of the Democratic Party, then you better believe that according to everything that I've seen about party politics in the past, they're going to try and protect her. They're going to try and protect him, and he's going to have to sort of protect her in that sense. And protect, when it comes to using the word protect when it comes to politicians, usually means that we as the people kind of get left out of that. It's not just at the top, but it's kind of the momentum that will be carried throughout the rest of the party. So we cannot lose this moment. To Maxine Waters' credit, I think we need to continue to hit the streets. We need to continue to get mad and upset at every single situation like this, every single one. Not that I'm saying that we have to follow it. I've talked about mental health before. Sometimes you got to take a step back from all this, right? But I think the idea that we as citizens are going to continue to make life difficult for those that allow this kind of behavior is something that's starting to wear down the powers that be. They can no longer stand on the same legs that they're standing on. They're going to have to bring something else to the table. And that's where we start to see the new ideas for change, right there on the table. Boom. It's not going to be here yet. We need to exercise a little bit more patience to finally see that day come, but we're on the right track. I still do believe that. All right, that's all the comments I got for today. If you have a comment, leave it in the comments section. We'll be sure to read it for you on the next one. I appreciate Maya tuning in. She says, ready for Maya Nichols Worth. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m. is the best way to tune in live for the conversation. Other than that, if you miss it, it's all good. You can check us out on Anchor, on Spotify, on Facebook, and YouTube, of course, all by searching A. Nichols Worth. Let me put it up on the screen before we get out of here just so that people see it. A. Nichols Worth. There it is. You can subscribe on YouTube and all that good stuff. So if you guys have questions or comments, leave them, and I will talk to you guys for a fresh edition of a Nichols Worth on Wednesday. Have a happy Monday, everybody.